I stood frozen in the courtroom while my daughter-in-law Amanda sobbed dramatically, pointing at me with a shaking finger. My son Jake looked at me with pure disgust, like I was a stranger, not the father who raised him. My heart shattered into a million pieces as my own family believed these horrible lies about me. 6 months ago, I was happily living in my home, never imagining that inviting my son and his wife to move in would destroy my reputation and nearly send me to jail. But Amanda had no idea about the security cameras. 3 years after losing my wife Carol to cancer, I was still struggling to find purpose in my daily routine. Our 4-bedroom house in the suburbs of Portland felt cavernous and empty with just me rattling around in it. I spent 45 years working as a construction foreman, building other people's dream homes while coming home each night to the love of my life. Now at 68, retirement should have been our golden years together. Instead, I wandered from room to room, surrounded by memories but no one to share them with. My typical day consisted of a solitary breakfast, maybe some gardening if the weather permitted, followed by long hours watching television or tinkering in my workshop. The highlight of my week was Sunday dinner at my brother Terry's house, where his wife Linda would fuss over me and make sure I ate a proper meal. They lived 30 miles away though, so these visits weren't as frequent as any of us would have liked. When my phone rang one Tuesday morning in April, I was surprised to hear my son Jake's voice. At 38, he'd been married to Amanda for nearly 5 years, and they lived across the state. We talked regularly but not frequently, maybe once every couple of weeks. "Dad, I hate to ask this," Jake said, his voice tight with what I now recognize was carefully manufactured stress, "but Amanda and I are in a tough spot. The company I've been with for 8 years just announced major layoffs, and I'm one of them." "Son, I'm so sorry," I replied, genuinely concerned. Jake had always been responsible, working his way up at a manufacturing firm after college. "We've been trying to make it work with savings, but with the housing market the way it is," he trailed off. "Our landlord is selling our building, and we need to be out in 2 weeks. We're underwater on everything, Dad." I didn't hesitate. "Why don't you both come stay with me? This house is way too big for just one person." The relief in his voice seemed so genuine. "Are you sure? It would just be until I find something new and we get back on our feet. 6 months tops, I promise." I felt a surge of purpose for the first time in years. "Of course I'm sure. This is your home too, always has been." After hanging up, I practically flew around the house, cleaning and preparing. I spent the next week fixing up the guest bedroom, clearing out Carol's old craft room as a potential office space for Jake, and stocking the refrigerator with all his favorite foods from childhood. I even drove to the hardware store and bought a new shower head for their bathroom, remembering how Jake always complained about low water pressure when he visited. When they pulled into the driveway 10 days later, their small sedan packed with belongings, I felt like a kid at Christmas. Jake looked thinner than when I'd last seen him 6 months earlier, the stress of unemployment evident in the new lines around his eyes. Amanda, a petite brunette with an engaging smile, hugged me warmly. "Thank you so much for this, Sammy," she said. I'd always insisted she call me by my first name rather than Mr. Williams or Dad since we were close in age. "You're literally saving us." That first evening we stayed up late. I grilled steaks on the patio while Jake and Amanda told stories about their life together. For the first time since Carol died, laughter filled my home. I went to bed feeling like a cloud had lifted, like my life had purpose again. I wasn't just a widower rattling around an empty house anymore, I was helping my family through a rough patch. The first week was wonderful. Amanda proved to be an excellent cook, insisting on preparing dinner each night to earn her keep. She brought me coffee in the mornings, asking thoughtful questions about Carol and our life together. I shared photo albums and stories I hadn't talked about in years. Jake spent his day's job hunting online, while Amanda mentioned vague plans about finding administrative work. "The market will turn around," I assured them both. "And there's no rush. Family takes care of family." One evening, as we finished a delicious lasagna Amanda had made, Jake raised his beer bottle. "To Dad," he said, "for being our safety net when we needed one." I felt tears prick my eyes. Having them there had awakened something in me I thought had died with Carol, hope for the future, a reason to get up each morning. The next afternoon, I returned early from grocery shopping, arms loaded with bags. I let myself in quietly through the side door by the kitchen, not wanting to disturb Jake if he was on a job interview call. As I set the bags on the counter, I heard Amanda's voice floating down from the second floor, where she was on the phone in the guest room. This place is perfect. With your father's health issues, he won't last more than a few years. Then the house is ours." I froze, the words hitting me like a physical blow. Health issues? I had mild hypertension that was well controlled with medication, nothing life-threatening. And the casual way she discussed my death, like it was a convenient timeline for their financial planning. When I heard footsteps on the stairs, I busied myself unpacking groceries, my mind racing. Maybe I'd misheard or misunderstood. Maybe she was talking about someone else's father. But the cold calculation in her tone had been unmistakable. Jake entered the kitchen, his face lighting up. "Hey, Dad, need help with those bags?" I studied my son's face, searching for any sign that he shared his wife's apparent mercenary view of our arrangement, but saw only the same open expression he'd had since childhood. "Sure thing," I managed, pushing aside my uneasiness. I'd always prided myself on giving people the benefit of the doubt. Surely I had misinterpreted what I'd heard. Within days, small things began to change around the house. I came downstairs one morning to find the living room completely rearranged. The comfortable old recliner where I'd spent countless evenings had been relegated to a corner, replaced by a sleek armchair I didn't recognize. "Hope you don't mind," Amanda said brightly when I commented on it. "This layout makes much better use of the space. And that old chair was an eyesore." It wasn't worth arguing about, I reasoned. They were making a home here temporarily, and if a new furniture arrangement made Amanda happy, so be it. But when I returned from my weekly lunch with Terry to find Carol's collection of handmade quilts removed from the hallway chest and replaced with abstract prints, something felt off. "Those quilts are special to me," I told Amanda that evening. "Carol made them." She responded with a sympathetic head tilt that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Sammy. I just thought it might be healthier for you to not have so many reminders everywhere, moving forward and all that." She patted my arm. "I've put them safely in the attic." Jake, entering the room, gave me a concerned look. "Dad, Amanda's just trying to help. You've been stuck in the past since Mom died. Maybe some changes would be good for you." I swallowed my objections. Was I being unreasonable? Too set in my ways? Over the next 2 weeks, more frictions arose. Amanda instituted new house rules, shoes off at the door, no eating in the living room, specific laundry days for each person, reasonable enough requests, but delivered with a proprietary air that made me feel like a guest in my own home. When I mentioned I'd always enjoyed my morning coffee while watching the news in the living room, she smiled tightly. "The crumbs get everywhere, Sammy, and the coffee rings on the tables. It's just not hygienic." Jake began to give me worried glances whenever I objected to any of these changes. One night, I overheard them talking in their bedroom. "Your dad seems really resistant to change," Amanda was saying. "I'm worried about him. Did you notice how he forgot where he put his glasses 3 times this week?" "He's just getting older," Jake replied. But his voice held a note of concern that troubled me. My grandmother started like that. Little things at first, then. Their voices dropped too low for me to hear more, but the implication was clear. They thought I was slipping mentally. One evening, after Amanda had pointedly excluded me from a conversation about their weekend plans by speaking in half-sentences laden with private references, I called my old friend Gerald for advice. We'd worked together for 30 years before retirement, and he never sugarcoated anything. "Sounds like the girl's staking her territory," he said bluntly. "Happened to my cousin Walt when his daughter moved back home after her divorce. Started with rearranging furniture, ended with him being pushed into assisted living while she sold his house out from under him." "Jake wouldn't let that happen," I protested. "You sure about that? What's he done when she's making these changes? Backed you or her?" The silence was my answer. "Listen, not saying they're up to anything shady, but protect yourself, Sammy. After Marge died, I had a nephew stay with me, who helped himself to my valuables. I installed security cameras, nothing intrusive, just in the common areas. Gave me peace of mind. After we hung up, I sat thinking about Gerald's suggestion. Was I being paranoid? But then I remembered Amanda's phone conversation about my supposed health issues and how the house would be theirs when I was gone. The next day, I drove to the electronics store and purchased a simple security system, 3 small cameras that connected to an app on my phone. I installed them discreetly in the common areas, one in the living room bookshelf, one overlooking the kitchen, and one in the main hallway. I wasn't proud of the secrecy, but something told me to keep this to myself. 3 days later, I was searching for Carol's pearl earrings. I'd promised them to my niece for her wedding, but they weren't in the jewelry box where I always kept them. I looked everywhere, growing increasingly frustrated. Finally, I asked Jake and Amanda if they'd seen them. Earrings? Amanda looked confused. Oh, was that what you were looking for last night? Last night? I wasn't looking for anything last night. I was asleep by 10. Jake and Amanda exchanged a glance that made my stomach tighten. Dad, you were definitely up around midnight, Jake said slowly. I heard noises and found you in the upstairs hallway, opening and closing drawers. When I asked what you needed, you said you were looking for the blue thing. I assumed you were half asleep and guided you back to bed. You seemed to go right back to sleep. I stared at him, completely baffled. I have no memory of that whatsoever. That's concerning, Amanda interjected, her voice gentle but her eyes sharp. My grandmother used to sleepwalk when her dementia started. She'd move things and have no recollection later. I don't have dementia, I said firmly. That night, I checked the security footage from the previous evening. Sure enough, there I was, sound asleep in my bed from 10 until morning. There was no midnight wandering, no drawer searching. What there was, however, was Amanda slipping into my room at 12:15, staying for approximately 5 minutes, then leaving with something clutched in her hand that caught the dim light, something that could very well have been a jewelry box. My blood ran cold as I watched her performance the next day, the concerned looks, the gentle suggestion of mental decline. I was being gaslighted in my own home by my son's wife. But why? The earrings weren't particularly valuable except sentimentally. Then I remembered her phone conversation again. With your father's health issues, he won't last more than a few years. Then the house is ours. Was creating the illusion of mental decline part of a larger plan? And more disturbingly, was my own son involved? Or was he another victim of her manipulation? May turned to June, and Amanda's campaign intensified in ways so subtle that questioning them made me seem paranoid. The temperature in the house would change dramatically. I'd set the thermostat to 72, only to find it at 78 an hour later. When I mentioned it, Amanda would check and claim it read 72, making me doubt my own eyes. My glasses, keys, and wallet began migrating to bizarre locations inside potted plants, under sofa cushions, once even in the refrigerator. Each time Amanda would find them, her concern growing more pronounced as she gently suggested these were not normal memory lapses. It's nothing to be ashamed of, Sammy, she would say, Jake nodding solemnly beside her. Aging happens to everyone. More troubling still, I noticed a leather-bound notebook that Amanda carried everywhere and wrote in frequently. She made little attempt to hide it, often writing in it immediately after I'd had a moment of confusion. Once, when she left it on the kitchen counter while taking a phone call in the backyard, I glanced at an open page. June 14. Found Sammy trying to use TV remote to make phone call. When corrected, became agitated and denied it. Later found him in garage, disoriented. I stared at the page in shock. None of that had happened. The fabrications were detailed, specific, and painted a clear picture of cognitive decline. Why was she documenting fictional events? One morning, while sorting through my weekly pill organizer, I noticed an unfamiliar white tablet mixed in with my regular blood pressure medication. I carefully separated it out and later showed it to my pharmacist friend, Paul, who identified it as a mild sedative, commonly prescribed for anxiety or insomnia. "This isn't part of your regular prescriptions, Sammy," he confirmed, looking troubled. When I confronted Jake about the mystery pill, Amanda quickly intervened. "Oh, Sammy, Dr. Winters prescribed those last month when you mentioned having trouble sleeping, remember? You asked me to manage your medications because you were worried about mixing them up." She pulled out her phone, showing a text conversation where I apparently agreed to this arrangement. I had no recollection of such a conversation, nor of any recent doctor's visit for sleep issues. Jake looked between us, clearly unsure who to believe. "Show me that text again," I requested, and Amanda handed me her phone. The number listed as mine was correct, but the writing style wasn't mine at all. I never used the phrase, "sounds good," that appeared repeatedly in the messages. However, pointing this out would only make me seem more paranoid. That night I checked my security cameras again. The footage showed Amanda entering my bathroom at 5:30 in the morning, opening my pill organizer, and deliberately adding something to several compartments. The video quality wasn't good enough to clearly identify the pills, but the furtive nature of her actions spoke volumes. The more I watched the security footage, the more disturbing patterns emerged. Amanda performed differently depending on who was present. With Jake, she was supportive, loving, and increasingly concerned about my well-being. When alone with me, there was a subtle coldness, small jabs disguised as helpful suggestions, and constant reminders of my supposed failings. When alone in the house, she methodically searched through my belongings, taking photos of documents, testing locked drawers. I considered confronting Jake with the evidence but hesitated. The footage proved Amanda was being deceptive, but to what end? If Jake was involved in whatever scheme she was running, showing my hand too early could be disastrous. And if he wasn't involved, the revelation that his wife was manipulating both of us would devastate him. I needed more information before making such serious accusations. My opportunity to gauge the situation came when Jake's brother Terry and his wife Brenda visited for dinner. During the meal, Amanda skillfully steered the conversation toward my concerning behaviors. "He was trying to pay for groceries with his library card yesterday," she said, with a perfect blend of humor and concern. "The cashier was so patient with him." I opened my mouth to protest this complete fabrication, but Terry was already looking at me with alarm. "Dad, is that true? That doesn't sound like you." Before I could respond, Amanda jumped in. "He doesn't remember these episodes, which is part of what worries me. The doctor said that's common with early cognitive decline." "What doctor?" There had been no doctor's visit, no diagnosis. I looked at Jake, who avoided my eyes, clearly uncomfortable but not contradicting his wife. After Terry and Brenda left, I retreated to my room, reviewing the security footage from the past week. The evidence was mounting, but Amanda's endgame remained unclear. If the goal was eventually taking ownership of my house, as that early phone conversation suggested, creating the illusion of mental incompetence could certainly be a strategy. But why the rush? Why not simply wait me out, especially if she truly believed I had health issues that would take care of me in a few years? 2 days later, when Jake was at a job interview, I decided to confront Amanda directly. I found her in the kitchen, updating her fictional journal of my supposed mental lapses. "Amanda," I said calmly, "I've noticed some strange things happening around the house. Items moving, thermostat changes, pills appearing in my medication that my doctor never prescribed." Her expression shifted microscopically before settling into concern. "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell Jake. These memory gaps you're having—" "I don't have memory gaps," I interrupted firmly. "I have evidence that someone is deliberately moving my things and altering my medication." A flash of something calculation? Alarm? Crossed her features before she composed herself. "Sammy, this is exactly the kind of paranoid ideation the doctor warned us about. Blaming others for your confusion only makes it harder for us to help you." "What doctor, Amanda?" "I haven't seen any doctor about cognitive issues." She sighed deeply, the very picture of patience tested. "You don't remember the appointment with Dr. Hillman last month? Jake took you." She placed a hand on my arm. "It's okay. Memory loss is frightening, but we're here for you." I carefully removed her hand. "This conversation isn't over," I said quietly before walking away. That night I was awakened by a creak in the hallway outside my bedroom. Opening my eyes in the darkness, I saw a figure standing in my doorway. Amanda, her silhouette unmistakable in the dim light filtering through my curtains. She didn't move or speak, just stood watching me for nearly a minute before silently retreating down the hall. I lay awake for hours afterward, my heart pounding. Was she checking if her gaslighting was affecting my sleep, planning something more sinister? Or was it a deliberate intimidation tactic, letting me know I was being watched? The next morning, she acted completely normal, chatting about the weather and asking if I wanted eggs for breakfast. The disconnect between her nighttime surveillance and morning cheer was profoundly unsettling. I checked the security footage, which confirmed my experience wasn't a dream. Amanda had indeed stood watching me sleep, her expression unreadable in the low light. I began to feel like a prisoner in my own home, second-guessing every interaction, wondering what new fabrication would appear in her journal of fictitious symptoms. Jake was spending more time away, allegedly on interviews, leaving Amanda and me in an increasingly tense standoff that she pretended not to notice. My only solace was the security camera footage that validated my perceptions. Without that evidence, I might have started to believe their version of reality, that I was indeed experiencing cognitive decline, forgetting conversations, misplacing items, behaving erratically. The psychological warfare was taking its toll, despite my certainty that I was being manipulated. As June ended, I realized with growing dread that Amanda's tactics were escalating, and I had no idea what she planned next. But whatever it was, I suspected it would be calculated to remove me from my home permanently. July arrived with a heat wave that pushed the temperature into the 90s, making the house uncomfortably warm despite the air conditioning. The rising mercury seemed to mirror the escalating tensions within our household. Jake had finally secured a promising job interview with a firm in Seattle, necessitating an overnight trip. The prospect of being alone with Amanda for 24 hours filled me with apprehension. The morning after Jake's departure, I came downstairs to find Amanda preparing breakfast wearing considerably less clothing than usual, a thin tank top and very short shorts. In the 3 months they'd lived with me, she'd always been modestly dressed around the house. The sudden change was jarring. "Morning, Sammy," she said brightly. "Coffee's ready." I kept my eyes firmly on her face. "Thanks. Any word from Jake?" "He called last night while you were asleep. Interviews this afternoon." Throughout the day, Amanda created situations where we were uncomfortably close in shared spaces, reaching across me for items in the kitchen, asking me to look at something on her phone and standing unnecessarily near. Each time I politely increased the distance between us, she would give me a strange, evaluating look. That evening, as I watched television in the living room, Amanda entered wearing a satin robe and sat beside me on the sofa rather than in her usual armchair. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, though she'd already made herself comfortable. "Actually, I was just heading up to bed," I replied, standing. "So early? It's only 9. "Stay and talk with me, Sammy. We hardly ever chat, just the two of us." The deliberate intimacy of her tone made my skin crawl. I made an excuse about being tired and retreated to my room, locking the door behind me, something I'd never done before in my own home. When I checked the security footage the next morning, I saw Amanda making a phone call immediately after I'd gone upstairs, her expression triumphant as she spoke. Though I couldn't hear the conversation, her body language suggested she was reporting on something that pleased her. The pieces began falling into place. She was building towards something, setting a scene. Jake returned that evening, tired but optimistic about the interview. Amanda immediately monopolized his attention, whispering to him in the kitchen while casting significant glances my way. Later, Jake approached me with a troubled expression. "Dad, is everything okay between you and Amanda?" "What do you mean?" He shifted uncomfortably. "She says you've been watching her, making her uncomfortable." "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." My stomach dropped. "Jake, that's completely untrue. If anything, she's been—" I stopped myself, realizing how it would sound if I described her behavior. Without evidence, my account of Amanda's provocative dress and manner would make me appear exactly as she was portraying me, an inappropriate old man with dubious intentions toward his son's wife. "Been what, Dad?" Jake pressed. "Nothing. There's been no inappropriate behavior on my part, I can assure you of that." Jake nodded, but doubt lingered in his expression. "Okay, I believe you. But maybe just be more aware of personal space?" Amanda's sensitive about that stuff. Over the next week, Amanda escalated her campaign. When Jake was home, she'd flinch visibly if I entered a room, position herself so Jake was always between us, and make small comments about feeling uncomfortable or unsafe when I was nearby. When Jake wasn't present, she continued her provocative behavior, then immediately switched to acting distressed if she heard him returning. I began spending more time in my room or outside the house, anything to avoid being alone with Amanda. But that too became part of her narrative. I was isolating and showing mood swings, more evidence for her fictional catalog of my mental decline. One evening, I was reviewing my financial documents when I noticed discrepancies in my bank statements. Small withdrawals I didn't recall making, recurring charges for subscriptions I'd never signed up for. I pulled up the security footage from times I'd been out of the house and discovered Amanda systematically going through my desk, photographing documents, writing down account numbers. The next day, I consulted my old friend Patrick, a retired attorney who'd handled my will and other legal matters for decades. "She's building a case for guardianship," Patrick said grimly after I described the situation. "Creating a paper trail of cognitive decline, inappropriate behavior, and now financial mismanagement. With enough documentation, she could petition the court to have you declared incompetent, with your son as guardian." "And then?" And then they control your assets, your home, your care decisions, everything. Jake wouldn't do that to me, I insisted, but my voice lacked conviction. Patrick gave me a pitying look. Maybe not intentionally, but if he truly believes you're declining mentally and behaving inappropriately, he might see it as helping you, protecting you from yourself. He leaned forward. Sammy, you need to secure your evidence and consider legal countermeasures. If you have footage of her searching your files, accessing your accounts without permission, that's potentially criminal. I don't want to send my son's wife to jail, I said wearily. Better than letting her send you to a care facility against your will while they take everything you've worked for. I left Patrick's office with a heavy heart but a clear plan. I would back up all security footage to a secure cloud account, document the financial discrepancies, and consult a specialist in elder law. But before I could implement these measures, Amanda made her decisive move. I returned home from grocery shopping to find police cars in my driveway. As I approached, Jake came running out of the house, his face contorted with rage. "How could you?" he shouted, shocking me with his fury. "She trusted you. We both did." 2 police officers approached. "Mr. Williams, we need to ask you some questions about an incident that allegedly occurred here this morning." Inside, Amanda sat on the sofa, tear-stained and trembling, her clothing disheveled, bruises visible on her wrists. She flinched dramatically when she saw me. "She claims you attacked her when she rebuffed your advances," one officer explained, his expression neutral but watchful. "Says it's been building for weeks. Inappropriate comments, touching, escalating to an attempted assault today." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's absolutely false. I've never touched her inappropriately. I was at the grocery store all morning. You can check the security cameras at Fairway Market." Jake stepped forward, his voice shaking. "Dad, she has bruises. Her clothes are torn. She called me in hysterics. What am I supposed to believe?" I looked at Amanda, who buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with apparent sobs. The performance was flawless. "Officer," I said carefully, "there are security cameras in this house. Common areas only: living room, kitchen, hallways. The footage will show exactly what happened while I was gone, and what's been happening for months." Amanda's head snapped up, shock momentarily replacing her victim's expression. "I installed them for home security after Carol died," I continued, the lie coming easily. I couldn't admit I'd installed them specifically to monitor Amanda without sounding paranoid. "The recordings are stored on my phone and backed up to the cloud." The officer nodded. "We'd like to see that footage, sir." Jake looked between Amanda and me, confusion replacing anger. "There are cameras? Why didn't you tell me?" I pulled out my phone, opened the security app, and felt my heart sink. The system showed a connection error. All cameras offline. "They were working this morning," I said, panic rising. "She must have disabled them after staging this scene." "Convenient," Jake muttered, his momentary doubt hardening back into certainty of my guilt. "Sir, we'll need you to come down to the station to answer some questions," the officer said, "and you'll need to stay elsewhere until this matter is resolved. Do you have somewhere you can go?" "He can stay with me," said a voice from the doorway. My brother Terry stood there, concern etched on his features. He must have arrived during the confrontation. As I packed an overnight bag under police supervision, the reality of my situation crashed down on me. I was being forced from my own home based on false accusations by a woman who'd systematically laid groundwork for this moment for months. The security system that could have exonerated me had been compromised. And my son, my own flesh and blood, believed the worst of me without hesitation. The officer escorted me out past Amanda, who maintained her traumatized facade expertly. Only when Jake wasn't looking did she meet my eyes directly, and the triumph in her gaze chilled me to the bone. This was her endgame, not a gradual campaign to have me declared incompetent, but a sudden, dramatic explosion that would make my return to my own home impossible. As Terry drove me away from the house I'd owned for 40 years, I felt a despair deeper than anything since Carol's death. But beneath the despair, something else was kindling, a determination that this would not be how my story ended. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of police interviews, legal consultations, and sleepless nights on Terry's pull-out sofa. The initial questioning at the police station lasted 5 hours, as detectives pressed me on Amanda's accusations of escalating harassment culminating in assault. Without the security footage, it was her word against mine, but her case had the weight of physical evidence: the bruises, torn clothing, and Jake's testimony of her distressed state. My insistence that Amanda had fabricated the entire incident, complete with self-inflicted injuries, sounded like the desperate denials of a guilty man. Only the fact that I had indeed been at Fairway Market during the alleged attack time, confirmed by store cameras, and my receipt prevented immediate charges. Instead, a temporary restraining order was issued, legally barring me from my own home. 3 days after being removed from my house, I received notice that Jake had filed for emergency guardianship, claiming I was mentally incompetent and posed a danger to myself and others. The petition included Amanda's journal detailing months of my supposed cognitive decline and erratic behavior, statements from Jake about finding me wandering at night, and even a letter from a Dr. Hillman diagnosing early-stage dementia, a doctor I had never met. They can't possibly get guardianship based on fabricated evidence, I protested to Terry as we reviewed the papers. They can if the judge believes them, he replied grimly. Emergency guardianship can be granted temporarily pending full evaluation. Meanwhile, they'd have control over your finances, medical decisions, everything. I told Terry about the security cameras then, explaining that I'd installed them after overhearing Amanda's comments about waiting for my health issues to resolve the housing situation permanently. "Why didn't you tell me this was happening?" he demanded. "I could have helped earlier." "I didn't want to create family drama without proof," I admitted, "and I worried you might think I was being paranoid." We returned to my house the next day with a police escort to retrieve essential belongings. Amanda maintained her victim persona, staying upstairs while Jake supervised my brief visit. I tried to access the security cameras, but they'd been removed entirely, the wiring cut. "Jake," I pleaded while Amanda was out of earshot, "you've known me your entire life. Do you honestly believe I would assault your wife? That I'm losing my mind? Think about what you know of my character versus what you've known of Amanda for just 5 years." A flicker of doubt crossed his face. "The evidence can be fabricated. The journal, the bruises, all of it. There's a reason she disabled the security cameras, son. You're saying she's orchestrated an elaborate plot to what, take your house? Get you committed? Why would anyone do that? I don't know her motivations fully. But I have heard her talking about how my health issues meant the house would be hers in a few years. Check the cloud backup of the security footage. Email account SammyW524. Password Carol's birthday." Jake's expression hardened. "Dad, there's no backup footage. Amanda already checked when we were trying to understand what happened to the system. The account exists, but it's empty." I felt like I'd been punched. Amanda had been more thorough than I anticipated, accessing and clearing my cloud storage. "The psychiatric evaluation is scheduled for next week," Jake said, his voice softening slightly. "If you're right and there's nothing wrong with you, the doctors will confirm that. Then we can talk about next steps." But I knew it wouldn't be that simple. Amanda had been building her false narrative for months. How many people had she spoken to about my condition? What seeds had she planted with neighbors, friends, even my doctor? In a credibility contest between a supposedly mentally declining 70-year-old and a sympathetic young woman with apparent injuries, who would most people believe? My fears were confirmed when I ran into my neighbor Frank at the hardware store. His greeting was awkward, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "Heard you've been having a rough time," he said vaguely. "Amanda mentioned you weren't doing so well. Memory problems?" "Amanda's lying, Frank. About everything." His uncomfortable expression said it all. He believed her version. How many others did too? The psychiatric evaluation was conducted by a Dr. Warren, a court-appointed specialist. Despite my clear cognitive testing, the doctor seemed influenced by the documented history of symptoms. "Mr. Williams, these test results are inconsistent with the reported behaviors," he said, reviewing his notes. "Either you're having a good day cognitively speaking, or the reported behaviors are fabricated," I finished firmly. Dr. Warren made a non-committal noise. "Family members usually don't invent symptoms out of whole cloth. They do if they have something to gain." The full guardianship hearing was scheduled for September 14th. My attorney, a referral from Patrick who specialized in elder law, was skeptical but committed. "Without the security footage, it's an uphill battle," Lisa Friedman explained during our strategy session. "But the fact that the cameras were disabled works in our favor. Why would they be removed if they would have exonerated Jake and Amanda?" We filed motions challenging the emergency guardianship, requesting an independent financial audit, and demanding a full investigation into the manipulation of my medication. I'd saved the unknown pill Amanda had added to my organizer. 2 weeks before the hearing, Lisa called with disturbing news. They've filed additional motions. Amanda claims to have found video clips from your security system that show you watching her inappropriately. They're submitting them as evidence. That's impossible, I sputtered. The footage would show exactly the opposite, her creating situations. Not me. Well, they've got something. We need to see what they're presenting. When we received the evidence package, my blood ran cold. The video clips were indeed from my security system, but heavily edited. A moment when I'd reached past Amanda for a coffee mug was trimmed to appear as if I was reaching for her body. Another clip showed me watching her cross the living room, cut to remove the book she was bringing me that had drawn my attention. A third showed me entering her bedroom completely out of context from when I'd been asked to fix a stuck window. They've manipulated the footage, I said, horrified. Edited it to remove context and create a false impression. Lisa studied the clips carefully. This editing is professional, and there's no timestamp visible. We can challenge the authenticity, but without the original footage for comparison. The realization hit me suddenly. She found the cameras. That's why she escalated so quickly with the assault accusation. She found some of the cameras, accessed the footage, and realized she could edit it to support her narrative. But why didn't she delete all the footage? Why leave anything that could potentially contradict her? I thought for a moment. Because she didn't find all the cameras. There was one backup camera, hidden in an air vent in the hallway. I installed it later, after I noticed her searching the house more thoroughly. It runs on a separate system with different cloud storage. Lisa's expression brightened. And you can access this footage? It would show the true sequence of events? If she hasn't found and deleted that too. I'll need to check from a different device. My accounts have probably been compromised. That night, using Terry's computer, I accessed the secondary cloud account where the backup camera footage was stored. To my immense relief, it was intact, months of recordings showing the common areas of my house from a different angle than the main system. We've got her, I told Terry, reviewing footage that clearly showed Amanda staging situations, searching my belongings, and most damningly, deliberately injuring herself the day of the alleged assault, pinching her own wrists hard enough to bruise, tearing her own clothing, and practicing her crying performance in the mirror. For the first time since being forced from my home, I felt a glimmer of hope. But the road ahead remained daunting. The hearing was approaching quickly, and despite our evidence, Amanda had spent months cultivating an image of me as unstable, inappropriate, and declining mentally. Meanwhile, the financial audit revealed Amanda had opened credit accounts in my name, made withdrawals from my retirement accounts using forged authorization documents, and transferred utility bills to her name, all groundwork for assuming ownership of my assets. Classic signs of elder financial abuse, Lisa confirmed. Combined with the backup camera footage, we have a strong counter case. But be prepared, this will get ugly before it gets better. They won't back down easily. She was right. When confronted with the financial evidence, Amanda and Jake filed additional motions, claiming I had authorized all transactions but forgotten due to cognitive issues. They produced more edited video clips, more journal entries, and even statements from acquaintances describing my confused behavior. The week before the hearing, I hit my lowest point. Sitting in Terry's guest room, surrounded by legal papers and evidence of Amanda's deception, I wondered if the fight was worth it. Maybe I should just sign over the house, move into a retirement community, and try to salvage some relationship with Jake. "Don't you dare give up," Terry said, finding me staring blankly at the wall. "That woman has manipulated your son, stolen from you, lied to everyone including the courts, and tried to destroy your reputation. She doesn't get to win. But even if we win the legal battle, I've lost Jake," I said, voicing my deepest fear. "He believes I'm either a predator or losing my mind. How do we come back from that?" "One battle at a time, Sammy. First we save your home and your freedom. Then we work on saving your son from that woman's influence." The night before the hearing, I received an unexpected call from Jake's cousin Megan, Terry's daughter. "Uncle Sammy, I found something you need to see," she said urgently. "I was looking up Amanda online. I never trusted her, and discovered she has another name. She was Amanda Barrett before she married Jake. But before that, she was Melanie Simmons. Why would she change her name? Because Melanie Simmons has a record. Nothing criminal, she was never charged, but there are 3 separate complaints in public records from elderly neighbors and previous in-laws. All alleging manipulation, gaslighting, even minor theft. Sound familiar? My heart raced as pieces clicked into place. She's done this before. Looks that way. And I found one of her previous targets, a Mrs. Eleanor Kent, former neighbor in Cincinnati. She's willing to talk to your lawyer. As I hung up, a text came through from Lisa. Major breakthrough. Call me as soon as possible. The final piece had fallen into place. Now it was time to present our case and expose Amanda's scheme once and for all. The county courthouse was imposing, all marble columns and echoing hallways. I straightened my tie nervously as Terry, Lisa, and I made our way to courtroom 3 for the guardianship hearing. Despite our confidence in the evidence, the stakes couldn't be higher. My autonomy, my home, and potentially my relationship with my son all hung in the balance. Inside, Jake and Amanda were already seated with their attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit. Amanda had dressed the part of the traumatized victim, perfectly conservative clothing, minimal makeup, hair pulled back simply. When she saw me, she gripped Jake's arm and visibly shrank into her seat. The performance would have been admirable if it hadn't been so calculated. Jake wouldn't meet my eyes. In the 6 weeks since I'd been forced from my home, we'd had minimal contact, all through attorneys. I desperately wanted to pull him aside, make him see the truth, but Lisa had been firm, no direct communication before the hearing. Judge Martha Cassidy entered, a stern-looking woman in her 60s with piercing eyes that seemed to evaluate everyone in the room simultaneously. After the formalities, Jake's attorney presented their case first, painting a picture of a concerned son watching his father's mental decline, culminating in inappropriate behavior toward his wife. Amanda took the stand, voice quavering as she described my supposed advances and the attack that had prompted the emergency action. She presented her journal documenting my symptoms over months, the edited security footage showing moments taken completely out of context, and even tearfully described finding me confused, trying to cook food in the washing machine. It was masterful fiction. During cross-examination, Lisa was methodical, laying groundwork rather than attacking directly. Mrs. Williams, you've testified that my client began exhibiting memory issues in May, is that correct? Yes, small things at first, Amanda replied with practiced concern. And when did you first meet my client? About 6 years ago, when Jake and I started dating. So you've known him approximately 6 years. And in that time, before moving into his home, did you notice any cognitive issues? Amanda hesitated. Not really. But we didn't spend extended periods together. And these security cameras that provided the video clips you've submitted, when did you become aware of them? Another pause. In July, after the incident. We found them while trying to understand what had happened. Lisa nodded, making a note. Yet the footage you've submitted spans from May through July. If you only discovered the cameras in July, how did you access earlier footage? The system stored everything. Amanda stumbled slightly. Once we found the cameras, we could see all the recordings. I see. And who edited these clips to isolate the specific moments presented to the court? Our attorney recommended a professional service, Amanda replied, regaining composure. The full footage was hours long. These are just relevant segments. Lisa smiled thinly. We'll return to that. Now, before marrying Jake Williams, you went by the name Amanda Barrett, correct? Amanda's expression flickered. Yes, that was my married name from a previous relationship. And before that, you were known as Melanie Simmons? The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Amanda paled visibly. I legally changed my name after my divorce. There's nothing unusual about that. Indeed. But it's interesting that under the name Melanie Simmons, there are 3 separate complaints filed against you in Hamilton County, Ohio. Complaints from elderly neighbors and in-laws alleging manipulation, gaslighting, and theft. Would you care to address those? Amanda's attorney jumped to her feet. Objection. This is irrelevant and prejudicial. Your Honor, Lisa countered, it speaks directly to pattern of behavior and credibility of the witness. Judge Cassidy considered briefly. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Miss Friedman. Lisa turned back to Amanda, whose composed facade was cracking. Mrs. Williams, did you previously live next door to Eleanor Kent in Cincinnati? I might have. I don't recall everyone in my old neighborhood. Perhaps this will refresh your memory, Lisa said, passing a document to the court clerk. This is a police report filed by Mrs. Antue Topper 2. Kent alleging that you systematically convinced her family she was becoming mentally incompetent, while simultaneously removing valuables from her home. The investigation was dropped when Mrs. Kent died suddenly, but her daughter Carolyn Kent Marsh has provided a sworn affidavit detailing your involvement with her mother. The color had drained from Amanda's face. Beside her, Jake was staring in confusion, the first seeds of doubt visibly taking root. Lisa continued relentlessly. And these previous in-laws, the Barretts, they alleged similar behavior during your brief marriage to Thomas Barrett, did they not? A campaign to have his grandfather declared incompetent while you assumed control of family assets? Those were misunderstandings, Amanda insisted, but her voice had lost its conviction. Now, regarding the security footage, Lisa pivoted smoothly. You testified you discovered the cameras after the alleged assault. Yet we have evidence that you located at least some cameras weeks earlier and accessed the footage, editing it to create a false narrative. Lisa nodded to Terry, who operated a laptop connected to the courtroom's display system. Suddenly, the screen showed clear footage of Amanda discovering one of the living room cameras in early June, carefully examining it without disabling it, then making a phone call while smiling triumphantly. This footage comes from a backup security camera my client installed as a secondary system, Lisa explained. One you apparently never discovered, Mrs. Williams. The courtroom murmured as more damning footage played Amanda deliberately arranging compromising-seeming situations, then editing footage on her laptop, splicing segments together to create misleading impressions. Most devastating was the footage from the day of the alleged assault. It clearly showed Amanda, after confirming I had left for the grocery store, methodically creating the scene, bruising herself by pinching her wrists with pliers, tearing her own clothing, practicing a crying fit in the mirror, then disabling the main security cameras one by one. Your Honor, Lisa said, we have hours of unedited footage demonstrating a systematic campaign by Amanda Williams to create the illusion of cognitive decline and inappropriate behavior by my client. Furthermore, we have evidence of financial exploitation. She presented the results of the financial audit, showing accounts opened in my name without authorization, forged documents for withdrawals, and transfers of assets. This is not a case of a concerned son seeking guardianship for an incapacitated father, Lisa concluded. This is a calculated attempt to gain control of my client's substantial assets through false allegations and manipulated evidence. I watched Jake throughout the presentation, seeing the shock and disbelief wash over him as the truth of Amanda's deception became undeniable. When Judge Cassidy called a brief recess, he sat frozen, staring at nothing, while Amanda whispered urgently in his ear. When court resumed, we presented our final evidence, the testimony of Eleanor Kent's daughter, via video conference, describing a pattern of behavior virtually identical to what I had experienced, and the pill analysis showing the sedative Amanda had been adding to my medication without prescription or consent. Judge Cassidy's expression grew increasingly grave as the evidence mounted. When both sides had presented their cases, she took only 15 minutes to reach her decision. The petition for guardianship is denied, she announced firmly. Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary restraining order preventing Amanda Williams from entering the residence at 1542 Maple Avenue or having any contact with Samuel Williams pending investigation of potential criminal charges for fraud, elder abuse, and filing false police reports. She turned her stern gaze directly to Amanda. The evidence presented today suggests a disturbing pattern of predatory behavior targeting elderly individuals. I am referring this case to the district attorney for review and potential prosecution. Amanda's facade finally crumbled completely. She jumped up from her seat. He's lying! They're all lying! She shouted, pointing wildly at me. He doctored that footage! He's trying to turn my husband against me. As court officers moved toward her, she grabbed her belongings and fled the courtroom, pushing past surprised spectators. Jake sat motionless, the full weight of his unwitting participation in Amanda's scheme evident in his shattered expression. As the courtroom cleared, he finally looked at me directly, his eyes swimming with tears of confusion and shame. "Dad," he began, voice breaking. "I didn't. I never thought." I wanted to go to him, but the wound was still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. Instead, I simply nodded acknowledgement and turned to leave with Terry and Lisa, my heart heavy despite the victory. The battle was won, but the war to rebuild what had been broken was just beginning. The autumn leaves were turning brilliant shades of orange and red as I settled back into my home in early October. After the dramatic courtroom revelation of Amanda's deception, reclaiming my space had been surprisingly straightforward legally, but emotionally complex. Every room held echoes of the gaslighting, manipulation, and betrayal I'd experienced. I found myself installing an even more comprehensive security system, changing locks, and scrutinizing my financial statements with newfound paranoia. Amanda had vanished immediately after the hearing, emptying her and Jake's joint accounts before disappearing. The police issued a warrant for her arrest on multiple charges: elder abuse, fraud, filing false police reports, and identity theft. According to her pattern, she would likely resurface elsewhere under a new identity, seeking another vulnerable target. I could only hope the criminal charges would finally end her predatory career. Jake had moved in with his brother Terry temporarily, devastated by the dual blow of discovering his wife's true nature and confronting his own role in her scheme. For 3 weeks after the hearing, he made no attempt to contact me directly, communicating only through Terry with profuse apologies and expressions of shame too intense to face me in person. I understood his avoidance. The man had spent months believing his father was either mentally deteriorating or a predator who had assaulted his wife. Either scenario would be traumatic enough, but discovering he had been manipulated into enabling Amanda's plot to seize his father's assets and home, that was a special kind of betrayal that cut to the core of his self-image. In late September, I received a thick envelope from Jake containing a handwritten letter spanning 15 pages. He detailed his perspective of the previous months, how Amanda had gradually shaped his perception with seemingly innocent observations about my forgetfulness, her claims of discomfort around me, and eventually the fabricated assault. He described his confusion, his desperate desire to protect someone he loved from what he believed was a parent's mental decline, never imagining he was being used as a weapon against his own father. "I will spend the rest of my life trying to make this right," he wrote in a shaky hand. "Though I understand if that's not possible. I failed you in every way a son can fail a father." I read the letter multiple times, feeling the raw anguish behind every word. Despite everything, he was still my son, the little boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, the teenager I'd comforted through his first heartbreak, the man I'd watched graduate college with tears of pride. The anger I'd harbored began to soften, not because what had happened wasn't grievous, but because holding on to bitterness would only compound the damage Amanda had done. On a crisp Sunday morning in early October, I invited Jake to the house. He arrived looking haggard, as though he'd aged years in months. We sat awkwardly in the living room where once we'd shared easy conversation. "I don't know where to start," he said finally, his voice rough. "Sorry seems incredibly inadequate." "It is," I agreed. "But it's a beginning. Dad, I should have trusted you. Should have questioned Amanda's claims. Should have—" "You were manipulated by someone who's made a career of it," I interrupted gently. "The investigators found evidence she's done this at least 4 times before, always targeting older men with assets and supportive families she could turn against them." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "How did I not see it? When you think back, there were so many red flags. The convenient timing of my job loss, her immediate suggestion that we asked to stay with you, her insistence that we not look at other options. She's a practiced predator," I said. "And she exploited your genuine concern for me. That's the twisted part, she used your love as a weapon." We talked for hours that day, painful but necessary conversation that began the slow work of rebuilding trust. Jake described how Amanda had systematically isolated him from friends who might have questioned her narrative, how she'd planted seeds of doubt about my cognitive health long before they moved in, and how she'd framed every instance of my resistance to her manipulations as evidence of deterioration. "I keep thinking about that security camera footage," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "Watching her deliberately hurt herself to create evidence against you, practicing her crying in the mirror. Who does that? Who is capable of such calculation?" "Someone without conscience," I replied simply. "Someone who sees others only as means to an end." In the following weeks, Jake and I established a careful new routine. He would come for dinner twice a week, each visit a little less strained than the last. He insisted on reviewing my finances with me, helping to untangle the web of fraudulent accounts Amanda had created, and strengthening security measures against identity theft. The district attorney pursued the case against Amanda vigorously. In November, she was located in Oregon, attempting to ingratiate herself with a wealthy widower using yet another alias. She was extradited back to face multiple felony charges. Jake testified against her, a painful but necessary step in his own healing process. At her sentencing in January, Amanda showed no remorse, maintaining her facade of innocence despite the overwhelming evidence. The judge sentenced her to 8 years for elder abuse, fraud, and identity theft. As she was led from the courtroom, she looked at me with naked hatred. The mask finally dropped completely. "She can't hurt anyone else now," Jake said as we left the courthouse. "At least not for a while." By spring, the legal aftermath had largely settled. My home and finances were secure again, and Jake had found a new job locally. Our relationship, while forever changed, had developed a new depth forged in the painful crucible of betrayal and forgiveness. On a warm evening in May, nearly a year after the nightmare began, I hosted a family dinner. Terry and his wife Linda were there, along with their daughter Megan, whose investigative skills had been crucial in exposing Amanda's past. Jake arrived with Laura, a woman he'd recently begun dating, a kindergarten teacher with an open, genuine manner completely opposite to Amanda's calculated charm. As I looked around the table at my family, I felt a profound appreciation for what had nearly been stolen from me. Not just my home and financial security, but these connections, these relationships that gave life meaning. Amanda had almost succeeded in isolating me completely, using my son as an unwitting accomplice. Instead, she had ultimately strengthened our family bonds through the trial we'd endured together. Later, as Jake helped me clear dishes, he asked quietly, "Are you still having nightmares?" I nodded. The psychological impact of months of gaslighting and manipulation had left deeper scars than the financial or legal aspects. Less often now. "The security system helps." "Me too," he admitted. "I dream that I'm still believing her lies, that I never discovered the truth, that you're institutionalized somewhere while she spent all your money." "But that's not what happened," I reminded him gently. "We caught her. The system worked, eventually." "Only because you were smart enough to install those cameras," Jake said. "If you hadn't," but I did. Trust your instincts. That's one lesson from all this. When something feels wrong, it probably is. As our guests prepared to leave, Terry pulled me aside. "You doing okay, really?" "Getting there," I replied honestly. "Having Jake back in my life helps. He's still carrying a lot of guilt." "As he should to some extent," I said. "But we're working through it. Healing takes time." After everyone had gone, I sat on my back porch watching fireflies illuminate the gathering dusk. The house behind me was truly mine again, secure and peaceful. The gardens Carol had loved were blooming under my renewed care. Life wasn't perfect, there were still difficult days. Still moments when trust felt fragile, but it was authentic, built on truth rather than manipulation. The most valuable lesson from the ordeal wasn't about security systems or legal safeguards, though those were important. It was about the balance between trust and verification, between opening your heart and protecting yourself. Amanda had exploited the natural human tendency to believe loved ones, to give family the benefit of the doubt. But her scheme ultimately failed because evidence trumped emotional manipulation. I thought of Jake, rebuilding his life after having it shattered by deception. I thought of myself, reclaiming my autonomy after nearly losing everything. We had both learned painful but necessary lessons about vulnerability, trust, and the importance of verifiable truth. As darkness fell, I made my final rounds checking the security system, a habit I would likely never break, and reflected on how close I had come to becoming another anonymous victim of elder abuse. My story untold, my assets stolen, my dignity stripped away. Instead, I had fought back and reclaimed not just my home and my relationship with my son, but my voice. 1 year later, our family gathered again, this time to celebrate Terry and Linda's 40th anniversary. Jake brought Laura, now his fiancée. We had all moved forward, carrying the wisdom of our experience rather than remaining trapped in its trauma. To family, I proposed as we raised our glasses, and to truth, which protects it. Jake met my eyes across the table, understanding the deeper meaning behind my simple toast. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can strengthen us in unexpected ways. Amanda had nearly destroyed us with lies, but ultimately, truth had prevailed. That would always be our shared victory. Have you ever had to trust your instincts when something felt wrong in your family? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this account of my experience helped you in any way, please like and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories. And if you know someone who might benefit from hearing about the warning signs of manipulation, please share this video with them. Thank you for listening, and remember to protect yourself and those you love with both compassion and wisdom.